Now we're going to do the same thing, but weighted average. So you've got some kind of process, you're making calculators or something, and you need to figure out, it's the end of the month, you need to do your reports, and you need to say how much do we spend per unit and what does that turn it out to be for our inventory values. Alright, well, instead of FIFO, which is first in, first out, you might want to use weighted average. This would be more likely if it wasn't some separate thing that you turned out, because really FIFO is good for something like we're talking about the calculators, because parts and labor can change, so first in, first out is really a more accurate reflection. But something that you might be putting everything together all at once and then you send out one whole thing, like a checking a service, something like that. But you can use weighted costing. So the idea is you're picking up your beginning inventory costs and you're treating them in the current period. Alright, so remember how in FIFO we said, well, all that beginning inventory already got costed last time, but now we're going to include it this. So the idea is, how this is really different is that we have our beginning work in process inventory, and oh, by the way, I work one like this, 6.31, and there's videos for that, and the answers are in Blackboard too, but same idea, we're coming up with our equivalent units. Alright, only this time we are including ending inventory, beginning inventory, and for our direct materials, and we come up with our direct materials and our conversion costs. So we say this is the equivalent of how many units we did, and then we go ahead, calculate the costs, divide those in, and come up with a per unit cost, which we can then use to come up with our inventories. FIFO differ on how output is computed, right? So you are assuming that you don't necessarily have your beginning inventory as part of the output on weighted average, but it is part of the output on FIFO always, and what costs are used for the period's unit cost. So you will get different measures of output for these. Transferred in goods is the material that come from the prior department. All right, so you just bring that in using the previous department's output, right? So you say goes from assembly to packaging, right? That's transferred in. You might measure them differently than the original unit, or you might measure them the same. It just depends on what's happening in the process. Here's a separate production and cost data report. We won't be preparing one of those. We will prepare physical flow schedules, and that would be part of 6.31 if you want to see me prepare one, but it's basically just how units are coming in. Right? Beginning work in process, number of units, units transferred in, total units to account for. Well, that is how we begin to compute our equivalent units. We have to know the physical flow to be able to get the equivalent units. Right? So we calculate equivalent units, and again, as you can see, percentage of completion, obviously for problems in this class somebody would just have to tell you they're 30% complete, they're 20% complete, but you just take the units times how complete there are, and that's the equivalent units. Right? Then you compute your unit costs, right? And divide it by the number of equivalent units, and then you can add all those up and get your actual total unit cost. Then you use the unit cost to value the inventories, and we'll go through all these steps in the problems. And then you can do your production report where you tell how much you did, and do your cost information. And operation costing, we're not going to do, we're just going to stick with the weighted average and the FIFO. Basically what I talked about here and what I do on 6.31 and 6.32 work in the problems. But you can imagine this where there's some job order and some batch process costing. So if you were making custom calculators with like the company logo on them, I bet you've seen calculators like that. So you kind of have a blend of what's going on, and we're not going to worry about that, but worry about understanding FIFO and weighted average, okay? All right, I'll see you at the problem working videos.